welcome to our bits.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on, and let's get into it. So we've just had a little brief discussion on Japan, and I wanted to ask, you've been out in Japan, what took you there? Was it a project, a bit of inspiration, or something else entirely?
It's an interesting question. So I think it's hard to come across or meet someone who doesn't have Japan on their bucket list. And I've always wanted to go, much like many of the people I surround myself with. And having dinner at a friend's house probably about a year ago, as a senior producer, she was working with Done and Dusted X, who had the contract, or one of the many contracts, with the KSA Pavilion at the World Expo 2025 in Osaka. And they were short of a producer to run a live recording studio. And I went through a round of interviews and ended up being contracted to fly 3 days before I flew. And I worked as a cultural music studio producer in the KSA Pavilion at the World Expo. So I was there for 6.5 months, and literally just got back Saturday, 5:30 a.m. last weekend.
So almost still having the wonderful jet lag.
Yeah, I treat it as a 6-day process. I find 6 days, I tend to get over it. So ultimately, I'm still getting up at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the morning. And it's very odd coming from 6.5 months in the land of the rising sun, where the daylight is kicking your door down at 3:30 in the morning, to be waking up in the dark. Yeah. But I'm back to walking the dog and cooking and living my life in Southeast London, so I'm chuffed to be home.
Good. That sounds good. Japan has such a unique creative culture. Did anything you see there shift how you think about production or creativity back home?
I think working at a World Expo is very different to what I'm used to. Working at World Expo is a very different environment, I guess, to working in advertising or film production as we know it here in the UK or in Europe. There was definitely, within my job role, there was definitely a creative process and a methodology, working with a very small crew, working with Saudi artists, Japanese artists, musicians, producers, VJs, and in quite a small space. So I think creatively, I've learned a huge amount. I mean, I've learned how to run a live recording studio. I'm not going to, blow my own trumpet and say that I can now mix live audio, because I cannot. But I do know how to patch in instruments and run a DM7 and DMX and all the different types of audio software, which were taught to me by our mixing engineer. But I think the Japanese way and culture of working, firstly, their work ethic is obscene. I mean, they generally work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, something which I think is quite foreign to us. But postman. But I think, taking away from that, they have a very functional way of working. There's no disjointed approach to it. They have a systematic approach. And yes, they do work hard, but there's a lot more red tape out there and a lot more bureaucracy with how things are done and produced, rather than here. I think coming from Europe, from the UK, with our relationships and our reputations, we have grown accustomed to doing things in a certain way and have the demand of things being needed effective immediately. In Japan, there's this very traditional structure as to how things are done. There's an ABC, there's a 1, 2, 3. So things don't happen instantaneously, which, coming from what I knew here in London, stifled me to begin with. But then once you adapt to their culture and understand, respect, and appreciate it, you kind of get into the flow.
Amazing. Yeah, that's really interesting. And 12-hour days, it's the opposite here. It's interesting. Well, it is, unless you're shooting, of course, and then
yeah, of course, yeah,
standard stuff. Did you find any similarities between the way crews work there and in London, or is it just a completely different energy?
I think it's a completely different energy. I think Japan's known for its engineering. I mean, it's by far the best in the world, whether it's architectural design or how a table's built or a chair's built. I mean, they're just absolutely at the top of their game, and they always have been. Um, it's a tough one. I think they just work very differently to how we work, but their punctuality and their approach and their professionalism, I think there are a lot of similarities to how we work as film production units and crews. There's a lot of team camaraderie, there's a lot of communication, there's a lot of prior understanding to what the goal is and how to achieve it. Like I said, they're very systematical, so everything's done as an ABC or 1, 2, 3. So there are similarities for sure.
Interesting. It's just such a cool place. I went there a few years ago, and as you mentioned before, it's on everyone's bucket list, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's just so amazing. I think one of the only challenges that country has in respect of tourism, for example, everyone does want to go, and everyone seems to be there. There was a lot of places we went to, and it was just overwhelmed with people. At the same time, there was lots of places we went, and it wasn't like that. But it's such an amazing place. And what was fascinating as well, just as an aside, was because of what's been going on in Europe, you have to fly in a different way now. So you fly over, I think is it Antarctica? I'm not entirely sure. It's the North Pole. And it's that in itself, it just goes on, and you can look down and you're flying over it. It's quite amazing.
No, it is amazing. I think from a tourism perspective, they're changing definitely. I think they're definitely oversaturated with tourism. They welcomed it to begin with. I think they're now concerned about with how weak the yen is and how much cheaper it is to travel en masse. They are looking to increase tourist levies and things like that, because Kyoto, for example, is a prefecture just north of Osaka, where I was living for 6.5 months, is so overcrowded, it's unbelievable. And they've just increased the tourist levy from 1% to 900%.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. I think this is just symptomatic of a global problem. You see all these countries everywhere that just, social media and cheap flights have just enabled people just to come in. I mean, it's unbelievable. Anyway, moving on. We're going to talk about the Pop app.
Oh, nice.
That you founded, which is pretty rare for a producer. Although I am seeing other producers who I know doing similar, not necessarily the exact same thing, but they're trying to develop technologies for our industry. So tell us what it does and how the idea came about.
Right. Okay. Well, Production on Point, aka Pop, was essentially an idea I had prior to COVID-19. But it was lockdown that afforded me the time to actually develop it. And essentially Pop is a UK database and diary management application, both through app and desktop web browsers, that basically it kind of allows the film production industry professionals to connect on one platform. It's effective, it's cost effective, it's convenient. You can manage your diary, you can connect with people, you can check crew availability, you can share production information, and it doesn't necessarily, it's not in there it's not a disruptive element. It's a tool, it's an aid to our industry. It's to help us work better together. So I'm not necessarily, it's not something that's designed to kill off the diary services. In fact, diary services can use the app to control their clients' profiles. But it just, again, talking about the Japanese work ethic and systematic approach, it cuts the wheat from the chaff, basically. And I think we're working under such high pressure these days and such tight deadlines that actually it effectively works as a tool to clarify communication, whether it be from a producer to a crew member or vice versa. It helps people manage their time more effectively, and it can essentially compress what would be a week of conversations and emails into about 2 or 3 minutes.
Interesting. Okay, great. And what was the moment you realized there's a gap here, someone needs to build this? Again, it's tech world is very separate to our world. So, why did it come about?
Well, I think with close to nearly 20 years worth of experience in producing, I've actually always taken great pride in supplying as much information and as quickly as possible to those that I'm working with or bidding with or in pre-production with or post or whatever process of the production I'm in. And I think what has always been clear to me, and how I've been trained by some of the greatest people in the industry back in my earlier days, in my youth, is it's about transparency and clarity and trust. And actually, if you start a job, whether it's even at the early stages of bidding or pre-production or actually on location or in a studio shooting, is if you give people and provide information with total transparency and clarity from the get-go, then you or anyone you're working with cannot be tripped up by anything. Obviously, you're always going to come across hurdles, and that's what we love doing best, is production, is solving those problems. But ultimately, it's about providing the information up front so everything is laid out on the table. And working with tight deadlines and reduced budgets and high expectations, starting that workflow early on, where people know what it is, where they're going, what the dates are, what the job number is, who they're working for, who else is attached, when they're going to get A, B, and C, to me, it makes complete sense.
Interesting. And what's been the biggest challenge building something tech focused in an industry that's so human and relationship driven?
It's a very good question. Primarily not knowing anything about tech. Yeah. In that respect, I've never built an app before. And just for clarity, I didn't build it, I designed it. I worked with a lovely company in South Africa who helped me actually do the coding and build the app. But we worked on the design elements and the layout and the format of it together. I think it's an interesting one because, and it's odd to say this because pop is by no means in its younger years. I mean, I developed it during COVID and did a soft launch shortly afterwards. And to that effect, in answer to your question, we as an industry, whether we're theatre, live events, commercials, music videos, short films, doesn't really matter what sector of the industry you're in, we've always embraced change, and we have to embrace change because technology advances, budgets get reduced, timelines get tighter. But actually, one thing I don't necessarily feel that open to embrace is new technology, because we're such a traditional industry as to how we work. We have systems in place that haven't failed for years, and everything else advances. Why shouldn't other elements of our industry advance? And I to that point, it does. The app and the platform doesn't put anyone out of a job. It doesn't stifle anyone. In fact, it just helps clarify certain processes. So I think it's one of those things that it will take a while to kick off. I think it's probably, or at least I'm hoping it will be ready to fully launch, even though it's out there in the ether already, and really market it in the new year in early 2026. But it will take time for people to, I think, grow accustomed to it and trust it. It's a new way of life. It's like when we went back to work after COVID, it was a bit of a kick, bollock and scramble because there was so much work that had to be made and everyone was busy and there was a boom, but we had to find new ways of working. But that wasn't necessarily technologically based. It was more, right, how do we do this, and how do we keep ourselves safe, and how do we keep those loved ones around us safe? This is more of an advanced tool that will help manage our time and actually better our welfare and our living.
Interesting. And how has running pop changed the way you approach production or producing? Has it made you more structured or even more impatient with bad systems?
I wouldn't say impatient. I mean, I've always been a relatively patient person. I would probably say patience and appreciation has probably grown on me. I think ultimately, like, the shift in our styles of how we work are a reflection of how our industry is shifting. I think I've been fortunate, like I said previously. I grew up and was trained by some of the best producers, so I still consider to be some of the best producers in the industry in London. And how I was trained and taught to be, junior PA, PM, and then a music video producer, is actually reflected in that app. And I think it's just a case of learning how to shift ourselves into something new and not be scared of it. and embrace it. And we do the same with camera technology, lighting, you know, everything from the new Aries that come out and how we adapt and roll with it, and clapper loaders turning to DITs many moons ago. We do adapt and we evolve. And I'm not even going to go into or touch on AI right now, but you know, that's another part of our industry which is in its own right booming, but people are terrified of it, and they're terrified of it, but they're learning to use it. And if you don't shift your career and the way you work and your perspective on your job role with the industry shifting, then you're going to fall behind.
I think in every industry, unless you're willing to evolve, it's over. And then, so do you think apps like Pop could eventually reshape how the freelance ecosystem runs, or will it always rely on word of mouth?
I think the industry will always rely on word of mouth. It will always rely on human interaction. It will always rely on relationships, trust, reputations. But what apps like Pop and other industry apps will do will help that systematic flow of the industry. I mean, I don't think it will hinder it. And I think that's another thing with AI is I don't think that will hinder the industry. I think we'll learn to embrace it and find a way to use it. I'm kind of beating around the bush. I sound like a politician answering your question, but I don't think it can be a hindrance. I don't think it will change the way we work. I think it will just better the way we work and essentially help with workflow and better basically sort of everyone's everyday lives. I mean, effectively, it it reduces the amount of communication necessary to get a certain point across, which only then therefore gives you more time to do other things. It gives you more time to do other things in the workplace. It gives you more time at home with your friends and your family and your kids, but it also gives you more time to focus on creative workflow, which is essentially what our industry, especially advertising, is primarily about.
I mean, I'd argue that I would also add, sorry, that apps now today, I only see work, or I see a lot more new work through, and you see trajectories of people's careers almost online, obviously through social media, through Instagram, for example. And now I notice a lot more using LinkedIn, for example. So these are, one could argue they're apps in their own way. They're platforms in a sense, you know, they're apps on your phone at least. Which you are now seeing stuff. So, okay, great. Well, then if we move on to career and industry.
Yeah.
You've moved between freelancing, Familiar, Shameless, and now your own company. What's changed most in your producing style over that journey?
I think Shameless was a huge learning curve for me. I mean, I fell into music videos back in 2007 with Flynn Productions, was there on a retainer for 2 years, freelance for loads of other companies, Agile, Pulse, to name but a few. And then progressively moved into commercials. I've worked with some great companies, still do work with some great companies. And even though I have Pop in the background as something that I'm heavily focusing on now, like I said, really wanting to get it out early 2026, I'm still freelance producing and I still love doing what I do. I think I've learned to be a lot more patient, and I've learned to take everything a lot less personally. I think as a younger producer, I took everything way too much to heart. And I think going back to the tighter deadlines, the timings, and the higher expectations, you know, if you do things right and you do it well and you surround yourself with good people and good crew, less can go wrong. But then actually what we're all employed to do and what we've been trained to do is to find solutions and stay 3 steps ahead. So I've learned to take things less personally, and I'm not saying just treat it as a job, because we're very lucky to work in this creative industry. But if you stay 2-3 steps ahead and you're patient and you work with those around you and you're creatively collaborative, then you've got a much stronger chance of things going right and things being better and things being delivered above and beyond expectations. So regardless of pop being in the background and still being a freelance producer, I think there's a healthy balance there. So yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to what's to come. I know it's really difficult times in the industry at the moment. I'm very fortunate to just have had a 6.5-month contract, especially away in Japan. The industry will forever be changing, and we'll always find ways to adapt. But I think patience is a very good skill to have, and it's something I've learned to really hone over the last few years.
Great. I think patience is one of those things. It's incredibly important for everything in life, isn't it? Really, learning that. It's a shame you only learn it mostly when you're older. Through experience.
Yeah.
When you're working with directors, what makes you think this one's got it?
I think it's highly dependent on the project, the agency, the client. I mean, there's so many turning wheels within production. And I've worked with new up and coming directors, and I've worked with multi-award winning film directors, and I've worked with great companies, and I've had the fortune and the privilege to do so. I mean, showing my age a little bit, but I said earlier, I'm coming up to 20 years of producing. I'm 18 years in, and the best thing about what we do is every job you do and every day you work, you learn something new. I think when it comes to directors, ultimately it's collaboration. I think the older, the wiser, and the more experienced you are, the more assertive you can be. But that doesn't mean that a young, up and coming new talent can't be assertive. And I think the key is the teamwork and the collaboration. And you can work with a director in their 20s who's just come out of film school and they've signed to a big production company and they're doing their first commercial. If you have that collaborative aspect to how you work, and you trust your production team to build the team around you, should you not know who you want to work with, or even if you're a top tier director and you have the crew that you always work with, it's about collaboration. And if you've got that sort of creative approach to it, and you can work as a team, then so little can go wrong. And I think it doesn't matter how old you are, how experienced you are, it's the collaborative element. And I have worked with some directors who aren't collaborative, and those productions were difficult and challenging, but you find a way to reach your ultimate goal and deliver to your deadlines. But collaboration is absolutely the key word for me. And regardless of age, if you're on set and they want to ask a production designer, a director of photography, a first AD, I would love to do this, what would be your thoughts on it, because I thought this, and they listen to that response, then that's possibly the best production you can hope for.
Interesting. I think that's a really smart thing to say. It's very insightful. So what's one thing you wish younger producers would stop worrying about, and one thing they should?
One thing they should stop worrying about. I think probably my key learning is don't take things too personally. You are ultimately in a job, but you're doing a job within a creative industry that's more creative than any other industry in the world. And it's not personal. And we all make mistakes. I still make mistakes. Every human, it's human. You can't be a human being without making mistakes, and making mistakes affords you to learn and not make the mistakes again. So don't take anything too personally. What should they not stop doing? Was the second part of the question correct?
Second part of the question, and one thing they should.
Oh, they should stop doing.
No. So
no.
The question is very similar. It's what's one thing you wish younger producers would stop worrying about?
Yeah.
And one thing they should worry about. So yeah, you're right. Actually, I think I may have got it wrong.
No, that's right. One thing they should stop worrying about.
One thing they should worry about, basically, or be mindful of.
Wow, you've really stumped me with that one.
Well, maybe it's
Absolutely.
this information share, and you touched on it earlier, didn't you, about transparency,
Yeah.
making sure everything's there, because that's the thing, isn't it? Ultimately, when a job goes well or if it goes wrong, the amount of times if anything, let's be you hope for the best and you plan for the worst.
Yeah.
And if there's anything at the end, as a young producer, you've just got to be, in my view, when we're doing a job, you've got to be mindful that everything is lined up. There's a response to every email. There's a clear line for why a producer, an agency, or whatever the situation is, has come back and said something, so you know exactly where and when things are happening. For me, that's the key, isn't it? And I think you mentioned it before, the transparency thing. I just think, and as you also mentioned with the technology side when we were talking about that, I've never known so much information coming on. It's just, I keep talking about to people, it's overwhelming at the moment. Not overwhelming,
well, I was going to say,
it feels
it can be overwhelming, I think. And I remember when we transitioned from 35mm to digital, and I think it was the Red One was the first one that came out, and that was hugely overwhelming. There was no such thing as DIT. As music video producers, we were transferring data, and it was hugely overwhelming. None of us knew what we were doing, but we adapted. So it's when you worry and you panic, things go wrong. There's no cause of panic. If you listen, trust, have transparency, digest, absorb, and retain that information, whether you need to use it or have to use it ever again is actually irrelevant. If you can absorb and sponge all that information, then you've got the facts to move forward and not be overwhelmed by things.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Good. And then how do you balance creativity with the logistics? Do you ever find the two pulling in opposite directions? I mean, every job, surely. Literally every job. It's sort of I'm like, as I was reading that, it's like, this is ridiculous. Of course, it's
Alex, you just answered your own question, but it's just healthy balance, isn't it? And we talked about the Japanese work ethic and the 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and that's been a huge issue with our industry in the past few years, and there've been really, really terrible outcomes from overworking. And I think it's finding a balance, and it's finding a balance, like, as a reflection on work hours, it's finding a balance between logistics and creative. And one of the things I've always done and was taught to do as a young producer and moving up is really inform yourself of the creative from the outset. As a producer now bidding a job, the first thing I do is I do a script breakdown. And from that script breakdown, it tells me how many locations I have, whether it's daylight or nighttime, is it interior, exterior. If you've got that information of the creative, everything's going to evolve. A creative from an agency will want to add a scene or add a character. The director will want to change it from a park to somewhere else. But if you've got that information already absorbed and you've got the structure and you're 2-3 steps ahead of how you think you're planning to do it and how you budgeted and scheduled to do it, then you've got the affordability to move around and adapt. So I think creatively for me would always, which sounds weird coming as a producer, I'd always throw my full attention to the creative first and the logistics would come second. Then if the creative adapts and moves, the logistics can mold around that creative. So I think they have to work in tandem, but it's how you structure the kind of the early stages and the initial pre-production elements, really.
I think the challenge with logistics are what they are, obviously. But it's protecting the creative is the challenge. And it's that balance, because once you start allowing logistics to take over, you can lose sight of things. The creative. And I think that's always been a challenge when, for whatever reason, time is running out, money's running out, various other reasons, you can allow practicality to take over and not push the other way.
No, totally. And I think there's always a creative solution to a logistical problem, whether it be you're shooting in a park and it suddenly starts chucking it down with rain. There'll always be a creative solution as to whether you move that scene to a pagoda that's 10 meters over to your right and you change the narrative slightly, or you're running out of daylight. Classic. We've all been there 1,000 times. Well, how can you adapt to that? So I think there's always a creative solution for logistics, and logistically you can always solve a creative problem. So I think they do magically work in tandem. It's just finding a way to blend them together.
I just saw this thing with Ridley Scott was talking about, and I love the fact of one of the things with social media that I particularly like is I see all these behind the scenes of old films that I love. And he was talking specifically about Blade Runner. I love Blade Runner, obviously. And I suggest anyone should go and, should definitely watch it if they haven't seen it. But he talks about why was it shot in the night?
Yeah.
Why was it raining? And why is there loads of smoke? And he said purely because the set wasn't good enough to show in the day.
Yeah, amazing.
And everything looks better at night. And if it's raining, even more so. And, just that, it's that covering ultimately, the elements that and it was just, I thought you'd assume, or I had assumed, that was a deliberate artistic art direction approach. At night we always see the water. I'm always fascinated, even from my home, I can see out there's if it rains and there's a pool of water, you can see the lights with the traffic lights and things like that. All those things, and it's quite wonderful. But anyway, I would have assumed that, but his very frank, it was just money, budget, reality. It sort of made me think when you mentioned about the pagoda and creative sort of aspects of that. It's just really interesting. I love all that stuff. Okay, so if you could change one thing about how the industry works right now, so budgets, bidding, crew culture, I wouldn't go there. What would it be?
I think, in all honesty, the industry's changed so much. Agencies have made mass redundancies. I fear with the tighter timelines and deadlines, structure has slipped away a little bit. There's less training, there's less handing down of information. And I think if there was one thing that could change, which would, well, not change, there's one thing that we could all do better, is actually working closer together and from the very, very, very early stages of any production. I think there's too much of a separation at times, whether it's bidding and you're bidding against 3 companies or 7 companies or whatever, and you're bidding across 12 countries. It all comes back to communication. And actually, if we all, like we did many, many years ago, and have done not so many years ago, if we all actually start communicating better. I mean, look, COVID changed everything. I mean, you and I could be sat in a coffee shop right now, but for ease, we're not. But Zoom calls, Teams, Google Teams, Microsoft Teams, nobody likes Microsoft Teams. It's one of those things. It's like I've had, I mean, COVID was what, 5 years ago? I've had 1 PPM in person in 5 years. Why? We're all still working in offices. I know people don't do Mondays and Fridays, but so much more gets done in a room with everybody sat around a table, and we're not doing that. It's all about calls, and we're having a one-on-one. So this is super simplified. When there's 20 people on a call, one person has something to say and they raise their hand, but somebody else talks over them. The communication barriers are broken down. And if you do that, information gets missed. Same as WhatsApp. It's effective and it's a great tool. I can let my wife know when I'm coming home. She can tell me I forgot to get ketchup at the supermarket, whatever. But the minute you go into a production, you're in 17 WhatsApp groups with 30 people. You read the message, you don't think about it for 5 minutes, the message is gone. So I think communication is something we can actually do better, and from that better the industry, because we're losing that, not that human interaction, but we're losing that face-to-face.
I think it's a really interesting point, because a couple of the comments you've made, there's just my own, you only can work things out for, so many times from what your own life and your own lifestyle. And doing this, for example, doing this podcast has been interesting. I was very focused on doing it in face-to-face. Then I started using Google Meets, and for ease, you start, this enables me to record it. Obviously, this enables me to transcribe the notes, which is wonderful if you're putting it together afterwards, all of those things. And for ease, it's much better. But at the same time, I've been told by various people, you need to do more. They prefer at least the face-to-face ones. So I deliberately started, you have to change your mindset deliberately to go, right, let me physically go and do it. And you get much, as with everything in life, the more you put in, the more you get out. And it is a different experience.
No, and
So
I
yeah,
totally get and I appreciate that. And it would have been lovely to sit with you one-on-one. And I think there's that human interaction where you're face to face
yeah,
and you can see body parts and how I'm crossing my legs and so on and so forth. But you use the word ease. This right now, I'm in Southeast London, I'm miles away from you. I've just got back from Japan and I've got so much going on today, and so do you. This is very effective, but you use the word ease, and that's what's being used in film production.
yeah.
People are using WhatsApp for ease. They're using video calls for ease. Well, actually, it's just as easy to jump on a train 20 minutes into central London and sit around a boardroom table with 20 people and get some sandwiches and some coffees and beat it out around the table. So I think using the word ease for this effectively works and it's structural, but I'm not saying we've got lazy. I'm just saying we've done things because they're easy, and not everybody has office spaces anymore, of course, but communication is absolutely crucial to what we do. And I think there's something to be said about sitting in a room and actually discussing it around the table. Even if you schedule 2 hours and it becomes a 5-hour meeting, it doesn't matter. You still get shit done. And things get lost on video calls. But yeah.
I think that's really interesting, and maybe that will be encouraged soon. You know, as in most things, you go quite far to one way, and then you come back to the middle. And I hope that happens, because I think that, as you've said, there is something very powerful about meeting face to face for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the one habit or mindset that's kept you sane? Are you still sane, first of all, through years of deadlines and back-to-back shoots?
Enjoying my job.
Keeping
love what I
interested.
do. Yeah, I love what I do. And I think I've kind of always been scattered across the companies that I work with. And I'm very fortunate to work with sort of 4 or 5 companies sort of on rotation. And actually, I think a lot of producers I know, and a lot of the producers who I learned from and trained from, you know, they will have a director who they work with, and they work with almost full time on every job. And I've kind of always been very fortunate to work with a lot of different people, and I think that offers variety and it offers a bit of freedom. I think the freelance lifestyle, I loved my time at Shameless. I loved my time at Familia. I've learned a lot from working full time at companies, but I think the freelance lifestyle and being able to go out 2 o'clock in the afternoon and still be on a conference call on my phone whilst walking the dog, but then come back and then work with the director and then work with another director, having that creative variety and challenges, I think is what's kept me sane. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've done some bids over the years where you're bidding across 7 or up to a dozen different countries, and you know, the agency you're bidding for and a company's against, they want those options, and it can do your absolute nutting, but it's also the challenge that I like. And I think there's kind of a what's the word I'm looking for? Not systematic, there's a very kind of structured approach that I always take to producing jobs. I've always been quite simple in the way that I do things, in the sense that I won't take on a job and as I'm shooting start bidding another job, and as I'm shooting that job do the post on the other. I've always been quite particular about focusing my attention on one job and one job in hand. And of course, if I've got 3 months of post-production and I'm sat in a TK, I can bid another job in the background and still answer questions and pay attention to the telecine. But there's always that gap in between as well. I've never rushed things through, and I think that's been my saving grace, is I give myself time in between jobs.
Interesting. That's very smart. Okay, so we're going to wrap up now. And what's exciting you most at the moment, work-wise or personally?
Work-wise, having just got back from 6 months in Japan, getting back into it, reaching out, you know, talking to people like you, talking to EPs, MDs, heads of productions that I've worked with for years, who I've not seen in over half a year. I mean, I've been keeping in touch with a lot of people, and like I said, I know it's difficult times at the moment, but I'm looking forward to getting my teeth stuck back into it. You know, strictly speaking, I've been back for 3 or 4 days. I'm on a bit of a break. Once I overcome this jet lag and I've wrapped up the job in Japan, I'm ready for the next one. So I'm excited to see what the industry has to offer and what's out there, and how I'm going to adapt to it, really. It's obviously great to be home, walking the dog, cooking. I mean, my little apartment in Japan and Osaka was amazing and highly functioning and very well engineered, but it was very, very small. And it's nice being back in my house, and I'm under strict instructions to finish off DIY and do all the things I left unfinished before I left for Japan. So yeah, both personal and work life I'm looking forward to.
Good. And finally, if you could give a single sentence of advice to your 25-year-old self, starting out as a producer, what would it be?
Work smart. Not work smart, not hard, work smart. There's at the age of 25, I was barely producing. I was production managing, and I was finding my feet. And I think working smart has so many connotations and so many definitions, but it's about managing your time effectively, not leaving things on the back burner because you've got 2 days to do them. If you've got time, do it. Get it done. It gives you time to revisit and find the mistakes you've made, and learn from those mistakes. So I would say work smart.
Excellent. Well, listen, Mikey, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I know you just reminded me when we spoke before that you've been waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning still with all the wonderful Japanese jet lag. And obviously, as you know, this is all supported by 2.0, who you know.
Amazing.
And so when you're going out meeting all these things, and if you get any new jobs in, we would love to bid with you. That would
be perfect. Well, we'll be in touch for sure. And thank you for having me.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, listen, have a great day. And again, thanks so much. Take it easy.
Thanks, Alex.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.